We obviously spoke. It was last week, I think, and wasn't intending to have a conversation with you on the podcast, but the knowledge that you have about data centers and AI, kind of moving into your new position with NAATBatt, it was well timed because I'm working with a lot of people who um, are leaders of battery organizations, and ultimately there's been a big shift in strategy with the winter in terms of the EV market and looking at other application areas, whether it be energy storage or obviously defense, military, drone, and naturally data centers. There's so many leaders that are trying to get into that space, and it's so new, and the policies are still shifting, and it's a very dynamic space right now. Things will look very different in 12 months' time. So I think having you on to share some insight into how it's operating at the moment, kind of what the current landscape is, how you think it will change, I think will help a lot of people in the battery space to understand how to navigate and enter into the data center space. So, excited for you to share your knowledge. Maybe let's start with how kind of transitioning into NAATBatt and how you came into the post.
Yeah, no, it was really an interesting experience with that. My background has been rather diverse in a dozen different sectors, but there's been this continuity of energy on this over the last few decades or so. But with NAATBatt, and NAATBatt's the International Battery Association. It's been around for almost 20 years now, almost 400 members globally, and it's really a perspective of all things batteries that have now continued to expand out as well. Initially, it was in North America, but it's truly a global perspective with that. And this new role in NAATBatt, in which I'm the co-chair for the energy storage as well as the data center community, is what we call them now, not committees, communities. It really became needed, this new community, because of this convergence of what's really going on with the battery industry and the AI infrastructure world. In the past, batteries inside data centers were really kind of viewed just as this backup system. These UPSs, these uninterruptible power supplies, where you had a lead acid battery and would go in there and it needed to run for a few minutes in case power went out, and then that was enough time for these diesel generators to then kick in. So that's kind of the old model of how batteries and data centers were thought of and actually used. But AI changed all of that in a very, very dramatic way. And these workloads are really interesting within AI because they're creating environments that frankly have never really been put into place before. Massive swings and power draws, literally megawatts of changes within milliseconds. Huge differences in terms of power draw and the whole bit with that. And so essentially what's happened is that these batteries are not just this passive kind of backup systems. They're becoming core infrastructure, where every new AI data center that's properly designed literally has batteries as a core foundational element of that. And the committee was really formed because what's happened in the past is that you've had all these individual siloed environments. And what my job is to really to bridge all these different worlds, where you have the hyperscalers, you've got utilities, battery manufacturers, of course, as well, integrators, the AI developers, and of course policymakers as well too. So like I said, my role is really to bridge all these worlds together, to learn to speak these new languages and these new acronyms has been a challenge, but it's also been really, really rewarding on this as well. And you can have incredible subject matter experts in one area, but they really may not have a good knowledge on these other areas, and particularly in batteries. And I've seen that just in very pronounced ways, particularly the last couple months or so. I was at a conference in San Jose. It's the NVIDIA GTC conference, and 35 plus thousand people converged in San Jose, all things GPU, all things compute. But the understanding of batteries and their importance and how they should be deployed was something that was really needed. And the discussions I had were I don't want to say disturbing, but they were really enlightening in terms of the legacy perspective of the UPS only needing a few minutes of runtime, whereas now it really should be hours at a time. Back in December, I helped to write a scope of work for Boston Consulting Group along with NAATBatt. And we did what we know is one of the first surveys globally in terms of how much backup time really should be used in these AI data centers. And what we found was about 2.5 hours right now, but going quickly to 4, 6, and 8, and actually extending to 24 and more 24 hours as well as further time frames on this. We're in a whole other world, to say the least. But anyway, hopefully that gave at least some insights about how my role came to be and what some of my focuses and purposes are.
And you're obviously enjoying it so far. You speak very passionately about, like when we spoke last week, we spoke for an hour about this and we barely scratched the surface. And today we're going to keep this as high level if we can.
Sure.
So maybe let's start with technology readiness in the USA to power data centers and maybe comparing it to China, because I understand you went to China recently at that conference. So maybe let's start with that conference.
Yeah, no, I started working in Asia 30 years ago, frankly. When I first got involved with batteries, I started a company based in Switzerland and Silicon Valley where I made accessories, the toys for laptop computers, and obviously batteries were kind of important. So I started making battery chargers, auto adapters, and eventually invented universal docking technologies and commercialized that globally with IBM. But the evolution of what's happened in Asia, and particularly in China, has been nothing short of remarkable. In the last decade or so, to have over 1 billion people taken out of poverty into a level that's just unrecognizable is really an amazing accomplishment, to say the least. And I've spent a fair amount of time in China, in particular the last few years or so. A couple of years ago, I was in 8 different cities and started going to a conference over there. It's called the Chinese International Battery Fair. Fair, I'm not sure is the proper interpretation of this, and that was in Chongqing, which is about 1,000 miles inland from Shanghai, and there were 400,000 attendees at a battery show.
Wow.
It literally, I'd never been to a few shows, many shows over the decades. I'd never been to a battery show of that level. The largest thing that I know of, at least in North America, is the battery show itself, which is the name of the show. And that's in the 20, 22, 23, 24,000 attendee level. But to show up to a site that has 400,000 attendees, every aspect of the battery sector you can imagine, and a lot that you could not. So that was a couple of years ago. And then last year, the show actually moved to Shenzhen, which is right across from Hong Kong. So it's frankly a lot easier to get in and out of that. And the venue itself is pretty remarkable. It's if you can think of a walkway, give or take about a mile long, and then venues on left and right, there's about 20 of them there. And once again, almost 400,000 people in attendance there. And so I got a call, literally it was just a few weeks prior to that going on, and a new conference had been put into place that was really focused on one thing. And that was really about how to assist the Chinese battery ecosystem, of which there's about 1 million people, workers in that area, 40,000 suppliers, just a whole other level. There's nothing else that compares to it in the world. But they started this conference that was focused on how does China take their technology and take it into the West. So they formed this conference and put it right on the front end of the CIBF conference, physically across the street. And so they asked me to come and give a keynote speech there. And it was really an interesting experience because I was the only English speaker presenter there. Massive screens behind me and real-time translation from English into Mandarin. And I had a friend and colleague, Shirley Meng, that was there, and she speaks Chinese. And she said it actually did a really, really good job. And the purpose of my speech was how to go overseas with the technologies, of what to expect and what not to expect. Because the way you stand up and the way you commercialize and the way you scale in China is much, much, much different than how we do this here in the West. fascinating experience with that. But the next week and a half was even more enlightening. And I've been to a few factories in China, but this next week and a half was really something that I was not expecting, and it was remarkable. I went to about a dozen different factories, R&D centers and locations that oftentimes foreigners had not been allowed into ever, or some it had been many, many years. And to be able to see the level of technology that was actually being produced was remarkable. Seeing drones that were flying for 10 hours at a time, seeing cities and whole developments that literally did not exist 8 years ago, and now there's 100 buildings and tens of thousands of people there. It was very, very humbling. And to be able to see equipment that was being manufactured and shipped out to what we call dark factories. These essentially are fully automated factories in which they have very few people, and hence you don't need light, hence the reference to a dark factory with this. And the ability to actually fabricate the equipment that makes these battery cells was simply unprecedented on this. And so I could go on for a while, but it was very much of an incredible experience to be able to go and to see this. And one other element I do want to really mention is that usually these presentations, one of the first slides they started with was, here's our intellectual property portfolio. That did not happen a few years ago. And now the emphasis was really on, here's the innovation that we've created. We know we have great technology, and now we want to be able to take this out into the rest of the world.
It's interesting the dynamic that you were there and talking about bringing Chinese products to the US, to the West. I'm speaking to a lot of people at the moment who are working for businesses who they're struggling because of all the new policies, and they're looking for an organization that has created a domestic supply chain. So it's causing issues there. So just before we go, I was going to talk about advice, but just kind of stepping back, talk us through the kind of governmental and administration situation, how you think that will impact things when it comes to renewables powering data centers as opposed to fossil fuels as was the legacy solution.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I want to give a little bit of context in terms of what these AI data centers really are in terms of the power needs. And so the data centers we grew up on, right? We're using CPUs, which are central processing units, and these are the chips that you typically have in your laptops or your desktop computers, and they're able to take a transaction or an iteration, and they do that, and they do things in sequence with that. The new technology is a GPU, a graphics processing unit, essentially. And what it does is it does what a CPU does, but it does it thousands of times simultaneously. So it does these transactions in real time. And so the power draw is remarkably higher. Just to give you an idea, in a single rack in a conventional data center typically takes about 14 kilowatts of power. The new data centers that use GPUs, it's starting at about 130, 140 kilowatts per rack, 10 times the power that the old racks that are still being used and have a great function on this, but you have to have increased power capability because of the training that actually is needed for these AI models. So it's going from 130, 140 kilowatts to later this year and early next year to twice that, 250 kilowatts of power compute capability in a single rack. And that's on path over the next few years to go to 600, 800, and eventually 1 megawatt of compute in a single rack. So the power implications are dramatic, to say the least. And it's really, really impacting what's going on globally. Here in the U.S., over the next 3 to 4 years, we should be up to about 9% of all power generated in the U.S. will be directed towards simply energizing these AI data centers. And by the way, we call these AI factories because their whole purpose is to provide compute and tokens on this. If you look at other places in the world, Ireland's a great example of this. Shortly, about a third of all the power in that country will be used to power AI data centers. Here in the U.S. domestically, some of the cities are have an incredible amount of power that's being directed. Santa Clara out in Silicon Valley, 60% of the power actually growing is being directed to the ability to actually power these data centers, and that is really the key constraint right now is power. It's not the silicon, it's power. And I've coined this phrase, which I call grid law, which really helps to characterize all that. And you got to be able to look at the needs of power before you can even stand up an AI data center. And so what's happened over the last few years, there's certainly been an emphasis on renewable energies with solar and wind and hydro and nuclear and of course battery, not as a generation aspect, but as a stewardship of the electrons that are being created. But what's happening now is that essentially any way that you can create an electron is now being brought into the mix with this. And so moving forward, I see natural gas as being a key enabler of being able to provide power for these AI data centers with this. And so it's an environment in which has been totally changed in terms of where data centers and these AI factories are going. In the past, they would kind of choose the location they wanted and power would come to them. It's totally opposite now. These AI factories are going where the power is, and that's first and foremost. One other aspect that you should be aware of, at least in the US, is that the time to connect to the grid, so the front of the meter power, is anywhere from 3 to 7 years. So let's just call it 5 years, which is breathtaking in terms of just how long it's, what the engagement time is and what these queues are. And so what you're seeing is that these AI factories are having to create, because of necessity, because of the length of time to connect to power, behind the meter. So essentially microgrids. And these things that we just talked about in terms of power generation, that is coming front and center. The latest information I saw from surveys several months ago were about a third of the AI factories were going to be using behind the meter. A couple weeks ago, I was in San Diego with a solar conference, and obviously part of that dealt with power generation for AI data centers. And we did a live survey while I was on stage there. Over 75% of the developers said that they were going to be doing behind the meter. And so where we're at this stage here is we're just not talking about data centers. We're talking about power infrastructure, and that's really what this new business opportunity is. And if you're not centered on that, your strategy from an AI perspective really needs to be a strategy of power delivery on this. So I really hope that the policies, not just in the U.S. but globally, can support this incredible opportunity to be able to move AI forward. The U.S. is in an interesting position because we're really the leader in AI infrastructure. We really are. Other places around the world have some incredible advantages on that in terms of China to be able to scale, to be able to have supply chain for the transformers and the switch and the turbines and the battery components on that. But in terms of core raw AI technology and GPU capability, the U.S. is really the leader on this. But the supply chains play a huge portion of this. And just speaking very transparently, we still have not done a great job in terms of building our supply chain and our ability to create these core infrastructure pieces, such as batteries, such as transformers, all those parts and pieces that are absolutely essential for these new AI factories. There's a massive challenge associated with that still.
Nice, thank you, Paul. Just you've obviously given so much advice now to executive teams who are trying to enter this space. But what would be your best piece of advice for an executive team that are looking to enter into the data centers and AI side of things? Obviously, talking to battery founders or energy founders.
Yeah, and thank you for that. Thank you for that question here. But AI has totally changed this infrastructure equation. And once again, I think the key thing here, and there's a few things that I'll describe here, is that the power strategy is now your business strategy. start with power. Don't start with the GPUs. Don't start with the land. Start with power. You can have all these other things, the land, the capital, the compute, the customers, the offtake. Unless you have power, you really don't have anything. And I've been on multiple calls recently in which we've got landowners, oh, this is a wonderful place, all this, they've got all the parts and pieces, and it'll end by saying, but I don't have power. It's like, okay, well, let's see what kind of feedstock you've got available on this. A few other pieces of advice is think integrated systems. Don't think in these individual silos. Think of power generation, energy storage, cooling, compute, operations. All this really needs to be able to come together at one time and simultaneously. Next piece of advice is super, super important as well. Speed to compute. That is it. Literally in the last few weeks alone, I have a new platform that I've spent the last year and a half putting together, which is called Full Stack Data Centers. And really, it kind of acts like a GPU, whereas we take all these different things that you have to have in order to have an AI factory, and we run them simultaneously. So once we have a shovel-ready site, we can deliver compute in 8 to 12 months on a global basis, and we do this with a modularized approach. 140,000 square foot building that actually goes into a shipping container, hurricane proof, seismic rated, but we can deliver 50 megawatts quickly going to 100 megawatts of compute in a single module. And we have requests now saying, listen, can you build this thing 24/7 and even reduce that time down further? And so we're able to get down to literally just a few months to be able to do that. So speed actually matters. It's a huge, huge deal on that. It's not so much the cost, it's about how quickly can I get my compute up, and to be able to move that forward on this. So kind of to net this up here, I really think the winners are going to be those organizations that can integrate infrastructure fastest and deliver compute quicker than anyone else that's offering that up.
And to flip that question on its head, people entering the data center market or the AI factories market, what are the biggest mistakes that you're seeing?
Oh my gosh, where to start with this? But I think the biggest mistake really is underestimating the infrastructure complexity. It is very, very challenging. And once again, these are different languages, different acronyms, different supply chains on this. And you really got to be able to understand that in a lot of detail and to be able to manage the ability to pull all these together as well. And another mistake is that AI workloads behave fundamentally different than traditional data centers that have been using these CPUs on this. As I mentioned, the oscillations, the training capabilities are unlike anything we've seen. And if you don't have the proper configuration of your battery systems on this, what's going to happen is you'll have massive power on and massive power off, and it's actually going to damage your power generation infrastructure, whether it's your turbines, generators that are providing the power, or other portions of that. And that's where batteries become really a core infrastructure of that. It helps to stabilize that out. And one of the quick element of this is that you got to understand that the battery architecture, it's not the UPS by itself. UPS is becoming decentralized. So it's going to an outside battery energy storage unit that's typically a 20-foot shipping container that's 5 megawatts or greater. And then you have a battery system that's physically inside the rack right next to the compute. And so to be able to understand that the batteries need to be properly architected is super important. I'll give a couple quick examples, and these are all in the last 30 to 60 days. I was talking with a developer that has a I'll just say it's larger than 1 gigawatt campus, tens of billions of dollars. And I asked him, so what's your battery architecture on this? And he said, Paul, I'm perfectly fine. I've got an 8-minute runtime. And I was just kind of taken back for a moment. And then we got an RFP in, and the request was for 10 minutes of runtime using a UPS. But what I quickly realized that these are legacies that are part of RFQs and RFPs that have really just been a carryover from older style data centers that have been relying upon CPUs. So at the end of the day here, it's really, really important that you understand the battery architecture as well, and how these workloads massively change as well. The other element of this is don't wait, at least in the U.S. here, is don't wait for the grid. 3 to 7 years, average of 5 years, as I said before. Start putting together your plan of how to create behind the meter generation, and then have those batteries as being a steward, essentially, of the electrons that are being created on this. Batteries are just not a backup system; it's an active asset.
Very good. And switching to talent. So I've had several conversations in the past about the shortage of US-based talent when it comes to battery manufacturing. This is obviously a little bit different.
Yeah.
Do you you talked about some crazy statistics there about how much of Ireland's energy is going to be dedicated to AI, about a third. In the US, it'll be 9%.
Yep.
So big figures. Do we have enough talent in the US right now to facilitate this? Obviously, we have a big power shortage. That seems to be the biggest issue, but
Yes.
Is talent a shortage as well?
You know, it was interesting. Talent seems to be a challenge. When I was starting my company called American Battery Factory a few years ago, the number one challenge I had was power. Number two was workforce. And so the approach that I took on this is I actually partnered up with local educational institutions to create a specialized training where we could have our own syllabus, our own training, and it would be 6 to 9 months long, where you could go in and the students would be trained, on specific capabilities, but frankly, you don't get unless you're in the sector with that. And so we have talented people in the U.S. There's no doubt about it, but they need to have experience in these AI factories, and there's simply not enough of them up right now. And it kind of goes, even broader, just beyond, for instance, just the battery element of this. It was interesting. I saw. Actually, I had a gentleman that called me up and was asking for some insights. He was in school, and he was just thinking about moving into the AI data center sector. And I really try to talk to students on that because I have a large family, and I certainly have appreciated the kindness of people over the years and talking to my kids and giving them some insight. But he told me about a large hyperscaler, Meta, that was actually launching a free training program for fiber technicians, because they have an issue. They need to have more qualified people in that area. And so at least the hyperscalers are starting to recognize that they really do need to have trained individuals that understand this new language, that understand this whole new paradigm shift with this. So what I'm saying on this is that I really think it needs to be a collaboration between industry as well as educational institutions, as well as the government on this as well too, where we can help to educate in a very quick manner those particular skill sets that are needed specifically for AI factory scaling with this. And it's really an interesting time frame. Because traditionally, as you've grown up, at least in the U.S. here, it's like you got to go to college, you got to go this. Well, it's now coming to the point where just because you have a degree, it may not mean you have actually skills that are needed in the marketplace now. And so on the technical side, wonderful opportunities that pay extremely well.
We could talk for hours, which is why we talked about doing a 2.0, a second part of this, which I think is definitely wise. But to finish things off, Paul, final question which I ask every guest is advice for anyone building a business. So for anyone building a business out there in our space, what's your best piece of advice for them?
You know what? Is to really have an open mindset on this. Everybody is learning. Okay, and anybody that says, "Oh, I got it all nailed down," they may not know what they don't know, on this. But kind of high level is find what the real problem is, and deliver a solution. At the end of the day, here, customers don't pay for, really cool PowerPoint presentations on this. And I've been doing startups for 30 plus years, and what I've really found is that be very transparent when problems do arise when you have your solutions. bring your customers in to actually help you develop that solution. They want to help you. They really, really do. And that's how you're able to build these long-term relationships on this. Keep persistent on this. Stay very, very current, and it can be super challenging in this world of AI factories, because things are iterating so fast on this. And so, once again, find a problem, deliver a solution, make sure that it's in a constant mode of enhancing, and listen to your customers and bring them in as partners are really kind of the key things that I would say.
Thank you, Paul. You're truly one of the key voices in our industry, with the experience you have and the work you're doing now with NAATBatt. So, I'm sure there's so many people who are going to listen to this and listen to your insight and learn so much about this industry that is so new and it's ever changing. So, whenever we do the part 2, even if it's in a couple of months' time, I'm sure a lot will have changed by then. So
Yes.
Thank you for being generous with your time, and yeah, really appreciate you doing this. Good luck with everything in the meantime, and we'll reconnect for the second one.
Thank you so much. There's a lot of, just as a final comment on this as well too, I'd really like to help to educate the communities out there, and that's another opportunity for us to have a chance to chat on that, because there's so many challenges that are going on. Final interesting takeaway from a few weeks ago when I was at the battery show in Charlotte, one of the panelists I was talking with on stage said that he's tracking over 150 moratoria in the U.S. alone for AI data centers as well as energy storage. So let's tee up that perhaps for another opportunity here.
Wow. Amazing. Well, Paul, thank you again, and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks for coming on.
Appreciate it, Jamie. Bye-bye.